4, 3, 2, and 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Move podcast, where we are trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement, biomechanics, training, and all kinds of other fun stuff. With myself, Anthony Emanuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We are joined today by Bryan Mirabella, who's going to talk to us about a host of different things biomechanically, in terms of the mechanics of breath. We're going to get into some nuances of nutrition and health and lifestyle as well. But first of all, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? We can get it straight from the horse's mouth, who you are, what you're passionate about, and what message you have for the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for inviting me on the show. I really enjoy your show. I found you a few weeks ago, and I tried to watch and listen to all your episodes. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be part of this conversation called The Art of Move. And I just want to add to the conversation. I don't want to say anything about right or wrong. I just want to add to it. Now, I happen to be a personal trainer for 33 years, but my background was, and I mean, I'm about to be 53 in July. So for 25 of those years, my background was linear weight training. I wrestled for 20 straight years. I retired when I was 26. At 26, I started powerlifting because I worked for a gym in New York City. Both of my bosses were 220 pounds. They were lifting heavy weights and like, oh my God, you're really strong. So then I started squatting and deadlifting. And I squatted 622 pounds drug-free on a 165-pound frame. I deaded 554 and I benched 365. So I was like 47th in the country, drug-free, never did a drug in my life, performance-enhancing drug. And but at 39 years old, I broke down. I mean, I was always hurt. In wrestling, I was always hurt because I was always linear lifting on a body that's moving vectorally all over the place, and linear lifting was just stiffening me, right, and compressing my spine. And it wasn't until I found the Thomas Myers anatomy trains 10 years ago, and I was already crippled. I was crippled for 2.5 years. I had 2 herniated discs in S1 and L5, and my son's stepdad is one of the top orthopedic surgeons in America, did his fellowship with Dr. James Andrews. And he looked at my MRI and he's like, guys like you are begging me to operate. But I just knew that if a starfish could regrow its leg and you could take out half a person's liver and it grows back, then I'm like, well, I should be able to heal my soft tissue. But I didn't know how. I just intuitively knew that I should be able to. So I anguished for 2.5 years in agony, pain every day of my life. But I was not going to get operated on. And then I came across the anatomy trains by Thomas Myers. And I went to a workshop in Cape Cod, and it blew my mind. They were telling me that the body is not a system of levers, except that's how I was trained in school, kinesiology, all the way up until I was 42 years old. I thought the body moved in a system of levers. And they were telling me that it's a force transmitter and that the fascia is more important than the muscles because the fascia surrounds the muscles and it tells the muscle when to turn on, when to turn off, and that's all the muscle can do is 2 things. So therefore, they considered the muscles to be dumb, and that the connective tissue around that muscle is the driver of what I would consider to be locomotion, but driving that locomotion through your diaphragm, which I'll get to in a minute. So then I got myself out of pain. This is a very long story. Got myself out of pain, fully healed my discs, fully healed all the joint pain in my body. And then about 5 years ago, I got turned on to breathing because of Wim Hof. Everybody knows Wim Hof. I started doing the Wim Hof technique. I became superhuman. It was the coldest January on record in New York City, and my son and I were out in 11-degree weather with a 17-degree wind chill in shorts, meditating in the snow, except my hands were going numb and my feet were going numb and I was getting frostbite, even though I didn't feel the cold because I was hyperventilating, and it made me sympathetically adjusted to the sympathetic stress of the cold, but it was also destroying my circulation because I was stifling oxygen from being released through hyperventilation breath. And the more I did it, the worse I felt. So I was like, okay, this is not for me because I'm not feeling any better. And I was a mouth breather because I was a wrestler, right? So I'm bent over my whole life. I'm crooked. So my head is arched. So I'm not fully receiving my breath. And I'm doing linear training and I'm stiffening and bracing my core. I hear you guys talk about it all the time, the coiling core, the bracing core. For those of you out there, I'm also a WEC method coach. And over the last year, I've been privately coached by Eric Teasy, who's a go to master coach. So, what I'm trying to do is learn everything and not say, "Oh, this method's better than this one," right? Let's go to the baseline, back to the basics. So then, after Wim Hof, I realized that that baseline was not good for me. I came across the Oxygen Advantage book by Patrick McEwen, who's from Ireland, and he was a 15-year Buteyko instructor. And he realized, kind of like maybe Eric did with WEC method, that maybe there was something more to it that they could add to, but the parent company didn't want to go that way. So he left and he created the Oxygen Advantage. And he's like Steve Jobs, he made it better where they didn't want to touch it. They're like, no, Professor Buteyko said you need to breathe like this. So I read the book. I said, when can I get certified by this guy? He wasn't coming to America or North America until August, and that was January of 2018. So he wasn't coming until August of 2018. So I decided to research Buteyko, and I took their courses. I took the beginner course, the intermediate course, and the advanced course, and that was for 6 months long. And then Patrick came to America in Toronto. I got certified by him. And then I realized that, wow, okay, I learned Buteyko, but this guy is teaching it on a level that is, when I say higher, it's more fundamentally sound, which now that I've been practicing GOTA for a year, I believe that what I'm learning through Flow Ops is more fundamentally sound to neurologically, or I should say myofascially, or maybe even neuromyofascially, teach my tissues to be in a certain position to transfer force the right way. So I always want to know what my baseline is, just like watching the children move. Are they baseline doing GOTA, right? Or are they baseline creating a bow? Yeah, they are. So I want to do the same thing. So I became Oxygen Advantage certified and I learned it, but I cognitively learned it, which wasn't easy because the science is crazy. And if you didn't grow up learning that, especially in my background with kinesiology and the linear lifting, I was never taught breathing. I studied with all the top movement coaches in the world. No one ever said a thing about breathing. That's why I'm here. That's why you guys have allowed me to graciously come on, because you're starting to also move into that higher consciousness. Well, maybe there's a little bit more to movement than just gait mechanics, right? The proper position to be in. Maybe there's an intention behind that proper position. And I believe the intention is your breath. And I heard David Weck say on your podcast, what did you think the driver of locomotion is? And he said intent, and he's right. In my opinion, he's right. But I've kind of known that over the last 4 years because being a wrestler, being a linear lifter, I struggled for a year and a half with my breath. It was really, really, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, I was in agony for a year and a half because I was breathing like this every day. I was like, because I was trying to breathe with my diaphragm, but my diaphragm had been twisted and atrophied according to an acupuncturist that I see every week. He's a Qigong master. I also see a network chiropractor who does neural emotional technique. So when I do something, I'm like fully immersed in the healing and holistic aspect of not what is right, but what feels good. I think that's something we miss out. And then when we talk about specific muscles and stuff like that, that's more of a mechanistic approach, and that's kind of reductionism. Whereas if we talk about intent, then we move at one. There's nothing, it's not the spine, Grakovetsky, it's not the feet, Goda, and it's not the hands, Weck. It's everything moves at once. There is no other way to do it. Everything has to move at once. Now, certain positions of the body might be stuck. There might not be any force or transfer going through those tissues. And that's something you address with certain techniques. But the intent of locomotion starts right here. And as soon as you breathe in, you increase your intra-abdominal pressure from your diaphragm. So my Instagram name has changed from Breathing with Bryan to Tensegral Breathing. And most people are like, what does that mean? And it might not even be a cool name, a name that people are going to remember, but they will in 5 years, because the body is designed to transfer force. And it's the biomechanics isn't, in my opinion, isn't even real when it comes to movement. It's actually biotensegrity, because my fascial body makes up these struts and facets of tension and compression. And that's what biotensegrity is. And that was coined by Buckminster Fuller in the 40s. He was making these tensegrity structures that were impervious to collapse. And ideally, that's your spine. But it's from your spine all the way to your skin. So tensegral breathing is simply total body breathing, right? It's pressure and tension, and the tension is supported or given to me by the fascia, which surrounds every muscle, every nerve, every lymph cell in my body. And if I didn't have fascia in my body, I'd be a puddle on my seat right now. So breathing is so much more than inhaling and exhaling. And slow conscious breathing increases cell-to-cell communication, which is your internal consciousness messaging system for your central nervous system. So your fascia is your largest sensory organ. So in order to show us where inside our body we need to consciously participate to emotionally heal and become spiritually whole, then we learn to breathe with intention. And your breath got stifled at the age of 5 when we went into kindergarten and they told you to sit in a chair, right? Up until that moment, from 0 to 5, you were breathing the way God designed. But as soon as you were told to sit and you stopped and you started bracing yourself, and then the teacher maybe accidentally shamed you, your friends shamed you, your parents maybe said words to you, you started bracing, you started feeling shame and guilt. And then what happens is you hold your breath, and you hold your breath on the inhale. And the inhale is an upper chest breath, and it creates a bracing of the diaphragm. So immediately I've now stored trauma inside my fascial tissue, and that's where the energy gets blocked. So you breathe with every cell. Your whole body breathes, not just your nose, your lungs, and your diaphragm, but every cell. And this goes back to a physiological law called the Bohr Law, which was originated in 1904 by Christian Bohr, who's the father of quantum physics, Niels Bohr, his father. And he was 85 when he originated this law. And almost nobody knows about it. So there's a physiological law of respiration. And there's a lot of breathing techniques out there. They all have merit. They're all beautiful. But what is your baseline breath? So tensegral breathing is about breathing with every cell in your body, but learning to understand what your baseline is. Just like Goda teaches, like I've stopped doing most of the workouts I did because I'm trying to create a new baseline by forming that beautiful structure in my foot, right? So I can keep these open gyroscopes, but for me, it starts with my breath. So when you endogenously make carbon dioxide, this is the Bohr Law. Carbon dioxide is the catalyst to tell hemoglobin inside the red blood cell to release oxygen. Now, again, I'll repeat, this is a physiological law. And if you overbreathe, if you do Tumo, or if you do Wim Hof, you actually stifle the red blood cell, or I should say the hemoglobin, from disassociating from carbon dioxide. And most people don't know this. You could still feel good, right? You could lift weights and feel good. Doesn't mean it's good for you, right? Because ultimately, over the course of 10 years, you're going to probably break down because you've stiffened yourself so much. So oxygen, when it's liberated, it looks for cells that are deficient in oxygen and it rescues them because oxygen carries a positive electron. So when you liberate oxygen from the red blood cell, it's now soluble in your bloodstream and it gets into those deeper strappy fascial layers that are already stiff, right? Because the stiffness is viscous. So your fascia is like jello. It's ubiquitous throughout the whole body, but your inners your innards are made of jello, and when that jello hardens, it can't remove the waste. And I can't remember if it was Anthony or Dr. Will. Yesterday we were talking about the lymphatic system, and this is where the lymphatic system comes into play. If I'm over breathing and I'm producing a lot of carbon dioxide, but because I'm breathing through my mouth, which most athletes do, if I'm breathing through my mouth, I remove this gas. There's no carbon dioxide to signal hemoglobin to release oxygen. So then all of a sudden, I start to get knots in my body because my body can't get rid of the waste. The lymph fluid becomes like hardened jello. So we think, oh, I need a massage to get rid of that hardness, but yet it's not dehydration, it's oxygen deficiency. And you're going to hear a lot about water retention and hydration. If the cell doesn't have oxygen, it can't have water. So I need to be able to stimulate hemoglobin to release oxygen so the oxygen can get into the deficient cells. And when it goes into the cell, it goes into the mitochondria like coal in the furnace. The furnace now produces heat. That's the heat you feel in your body, the energy. And then your body produces or it gets rid of that waste, but it also brings water into the cell.
And that's a really interesting point, because I know even Tom Myers talks about the point of a lot of this myofascial release work is to compress and then allow that fascia to release and draw water back in. And even guys like Naudi Aguilar harps on the fact that people's tissues are dehydrated. It's always dehydrated fascia. And you're saying that the dehydration in fascia is actually a symptom of a lack of oxygenation caused by poor breathing patterns.
That's right. Yep. And I don't know who else is talking about that, but that's because I have a good background with Thomas Myers. I've been going to his school in Maine for 10 years because that's how I got healthy. I've actually breath coached Tom. It's like a highlight of my career just recently too. And we're going to be doing more sessions because he's very interested in this. And some of it he doesn't know. So if we think about oxygenation, look, the red blood cell is the most important cell in the body because it carries oxygen. It's not your white blood cell. Your immune system are the red blood cells because there's 5,000 red blood cells to every one white blood cell. And red blood cells carry oxygen. So in theory, the way to get oxygen liberated is to have high carbon dioxide levels. And that's where we test what our baseline breath is, which means what is my threshold of carbon dioxide? Again, I could be a great mover and still be a bad breather. But like we learn in Goda, what if my inner ankle bone position was high when I'm running all the time? I'd be so much better of a mover. So there's always improvements we can make. And I happen to be working with one of the best linebackers in the NFL right now, Fred Warner, and I'm actively, teaching him how to breathe better. And after 7 weeks, he's experiencing some monumental shifts in his fitness levels that he didn't know was possible. And he's already one of the best. So now we have an opportunity to see and he's a very conscious young man. He's totally on board with this. Whereas most of the athletes I train would do it and then stop. because it wasn't taxing enough for them, right? They wanted to feel the burn, and breathing is emotional. You don't realize how much trauma you're holding on to in your tissues, and when it starts to come up, people don't want to do it anymore. So, you know, through your fascious fiber optic network, it carries voltage, and it's an oscillating frequency throughout your bioneurological system via these semiconductor properties facilitating your digestion, your respiration, and the removal of your metabolic waste. So, what is the driver of locomotion or anything for that matter? It's got to be your breath. If you get into a car and you have a Lamborghini engine, well, it does no good if there's nobody to turn the key. So, that key is that inhale, which brings the oxygen into my body, which allows me to remove waste, which brings the energy into my body to move with intention. And then with all the other mechanically beautiful movements we have out there to learn from, we start to be able to reposition my neuromyofascially our body. And as we receive the breath deeper, we create this cellular fascial breathing, right? And it should be thought of as a holistic living matrix and the primary organ system that's designed to unify all our bodily systems in order to synthesize physical functions into achieving an energetic balance and homeostasis.
Okay, so
I'd just like to, can I just take 2 seconds to kind of clarify and summarize a few of the points, just in case, because you had so much amazing information there, and one thing that I love about the way that you think and the way that you speak is that you can't just speak about one concept without it branching out into everything, because you see in terms of a unification. When we're talking about creating a grand unified theory of movement, we also realize that it's like you can't talk about one thing. We've had episodes where we talk about joint by joint approaches don't work because the body's a system. The one concept that I wanted to slow down and kind of talk about for people who are listening who might not understand the term is like a neuromyofascial web, right? This idea that we've had episodes talking about what fascia is, where it's this sort of, like you said, this web, this connective tissue that encapsulates our entire body. It holds our muscles. It innervates our muscles. We use the term like jello, right, to describe it. So its properties are viscoelastic. So visco referring to water, the sort of aqueous quality of it, and elastic as in, when you stretch this aqueous tissue, it can bounce back. It has elastic properties and viscous properties as well. And it's responsible for like every part of your movement. We've talked about the importance of not just using elasticity in your fascia, but I think we haven't really talked too much about just how much innervation there is in the fascial web and how much it's responsible for the transference of these thoughts and these intentions. And we have literally never talked about how our fascia is so impacted by levels of oxygenation and therefore breath, right? And so I wanted to slow down and just get people to visualize this, where you are like, it's like a Spider-Man suit, and your brain is literally innervating every bit of the Spider-Man suit. It's controlling the Spider-Man suit that holds all your muscles and your organs and everything. Yes. So I wanted to slow down so people could actually visualize that. And what you're talking about is, in terms of this unified human system is, you're thinking about the human with this viscoelastic web controlling and containing everything, and having that sort of as this baseline is like, there is no isolated part of the human body. The breath in your mind is the most important element because it creates it links intention and oxygenate, obviously oxygen and the capacity to handle carbon dioxide, I'll say, is like integral to every chemical reaction that's happening within the innervation of this fascial web. Is that right?
Yes. Great job, Anthony. Yeah.
And so I just like to slow down sometimes, because again, we can get really passionate and cover so much ground, but sometimes reflecting back some of the ideas in different verbiage, or specifically is a good way to
Right.
kind of visualize it. So just to understand the framework that we're going on, right? Like if you visualize your body as that innervated Spider-Man web, and it's being fueled by this oxygenation, this carbon dioxide exchange. You need oxygen to clear the metabolic waste products, the waste that occurs in these systems. Without that, you're not going to have hydrated tissues. You're not going to have the efficient transfer of electrical impulses through the nerves of your magical Spider-Man fascia suit, right? So this is the baseline. This is the model that we're working on with you, Bryan. And I wanted to take a quick second. I'm sorry, Will, I know you had a question, but I wanted to just kind of like summarize a little bit of what I heard and what as we continue in the conversation, where we can go from there.
Yeah, you summarized it like eloquently. That was beautiful.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
he's got a gift for that, really, for sure. So I was gonna say, Anthony and I know about 4 years ago we met up and did some Wim Hof work in the river.
Yeah.
Cold glacial river, doing the hard Wim Hof breaths, trying to stay in there for as long as possible. That in itself was almost sympathetic in its intent, right? So I became more aware of the breath, and really what it was for me, the biggest thing was letting go of my midsection, letting go of the diaphragm and letting that just relax. Okay, so that took me a while to understand because everything was geared towards the actual breath, in through the mouth or in through the nose, and that was to me breathing. So I bought a device from Bas Rutten, and it's a air. Have you seen it? The O2. Yeah. Okay, so you breathe through your mouth.
Yeah,
you put a valve on. Yeah, well, I figured you'd say that, right? But it did actually help me. It felt like my diaphragm was really expanding as I was doing it. So I put it in my mouth and actually breathe through my nose to stop myself from breathing through my mouth. Okay. So it was a different intent than normal. And basically, it's really hard to tell somebody else what the, how do I put this? Like the importance of breathing. When a patient comes in and I can see that they can't breathe, they're breathing through their chest. How do I quickly get somebody to understand? I used to do box breathing, right? So fill the bottom, fill the middle, the diaphragm, then fill the top. And it was an easy way to get somebody to start breathing. How would you get somebody to quickly get this if you don't have a lot of time with them?
Good question. The first thing we don't want to do is tell them to breathe any higher than down here. Now, if they have trouble breathing down here, then you immediately give them what we call many small breath holds. So you introduce air hunger by creating a tolerable need to breathe. So you just basically always on an exhale, you would hold your breath for 2 to 5 seconds. Then you breathe normally for 15 seconds, and you can repeat that for 3 minutes. When you passively hold your breath with many small breath holds, you actually activate the diaphragm. Because even though it's a small breath hold, you allow the breath to drop from the chest, which is a shallow vertical breath, down into the diaphragm. And then immediately, so you have people doing the breath hold, you make them do many small breath holds, 2 to 5 second hold, let go for 15 seconds. You repeat that for 3 or 5 minutes. And then you have them put their hand, you start off hand here, and then you get them to feel that they're breathing shallow and vertical. Then you practice many small breath holds for 3 to 5 minutes. Then you have them put their hands back, and they immediately go, well, that's interesting. I'm breathing more, if you want to call it belly breathing, which I don't, but they'll feel that they're breathing more belly, which means they're receiving their breath lower, because when you create a tolerable need to breathe, you enable the body to breathe slower. And when it breathes slower, it's going to automatically breathe diaphragmatically. Now, no matter what breathing mechanism we have, even if it's wrong, we're still breathing diaphragmatically to a little extent. You can't breathe if you're not breathing diaphragmatically. But you can have certain levels that the diaphragm is twisted or flat where you're not using very much of it. But every breath you take is somewhat diaphragmatic. The key is, like you asked, how can we get them to breathe diaphragmatically quickly? And that would be many small breath holds, 2 to 5 second hold with a 15 to 20 second break in between for 3 to 5 minutes. And then that will help them, enable them to breathe slower, which gives them more awareness of breathing what we call low, slow, and deep. Lower, slower, but deeper, because the word deep means far from the top. So as I breathe in deeply, I breathe with my diaphragm, not my lungs. And usually when you tell people to take a deep breath, they fill their lungs, and that's not the right way to coach them in order to have them breathe diaphragmatically.
So breathing diaphragmatically and not through the lungs, is that cueing the diaphragm itself, the area, to expand 360, or what does that entail?
Yes, I would call it a 360-degree breath, because the diaphragm, you know those beautiful Chinese or Japanese lamps? They're oblong. Well, the diaphragm, even though it's shaped like a parachute horizontally across the body, it's going to open like a Chinese lamp. So it's going to open like a canister. And that canister opens 360 degrees. So it'll be a horizontal breath, but it'll also be a breath that moves downward. And I want to be able to breathe as low into my body as possible in order to stimulate my kidneys to remove waste. And that's a whole nother realm of breathing. So we practice a very specific breathing cadence in order to stimulate our kidneys to basically fire up your primordial chi energy. So I'm really big on Chinese medicine. And if I breathe diaphragmatically, then I know that I'm stimulating my dantian, my power center, right? My center of my body where all my power comes from, to be able to utilize that energy. Because fascial breathing connects the main 12 meridians that intersect the 12 axiotonal lines, which are your frequency lines, and that further communicates information from your brain throughout your nervous system. So it's not so easy to learn to breathe diaphragmatically, especially if you've been mouth breathing your whole life and you've been over breathing. Like I said, for the first year and a half, I struggled mightily. Every week I thought I was struggling to breathe because wrestling and powerlifting just destroyed my breathing mechanism. So it took me a year and a half to learn how to breathe with my diaphragm. But when it happened, it was like it was like an epiphany. It was like my breath dropped into my belly, and I was like, oh my God, it was like they took an anvil off my back. That's how incredibly good I felt from that one moment. And it was a moment, it was an aha moment where I all of a sudden realized I wasn't receiving my breath. And that was because I had been bracing for so long and guarding. I'm a wrestler, so I'm in an offensive defensive position. So I've been bracing myself and I've been guarding, right? So I was burning energy, like beyond burning energy. I was butting heads for most of my life. And then I had to learn to be soft, which how many athletes learn to be soft, right? You, like Bruce Lee said, be like water. Water is soft until you hit it at the right angle and it's hard. So I only want to be hard. Like a Tai Chi master will never come at you forcefully. They come at you soft. And when they need to be hard, they're hard. So I want to be able to do that through my breath. I want to be able to acquiesce through a movement and then be hard when I need to, but not to hold on to that hardness, to be able to let it go. And I can't let it go if I'm always bracing and guarding. So I teach people the fundamentals of breathing, which is to be soft. So my whole life I walked around, I had a six-pack, I still do. But I had to always be sucking in my gut because I wanted to look good on the beach. And now I walk around and I let my belly hang out. And I don't care if people look at me and they're like, oh, you know, that guy's all muscular, but he's got that distended belly. No, I want that distended belly because otherwise I can't receive my breath, right? You see a lot of Buddhas depicted with fat bellies. It's not because Buddha was fat. That's the Buddha breath. So when I breathe out, I'll show you. So when I breathe out, I can expand my breath. So my diaphragm moves down. And when I come back, I don't come back to here. I stay here and I allow the breath to be expansive. The more expansive I can be with my breath, I get that tensegrity structure oscillating through all my muscles and tissues. That's why I call it tensegral breathing. I'm a spider web. I'm anchored to something, but in effect, it looks like I'm levitating. But I can source the energy from my fingers all the way to my diaphragm because my breath gives me energy back, the afferent efferent signaling. So my breath creates the intra-abdominal pressure necessary for tension and compression. And on the exhale, I receive the information back of where the tension and compression is greatest that I maybe need to let go of. Right? Breathing is very, it can be very, very finely tuned, and you get better and better at it. So when your fascia, your crystalline matrix, is properly oxygenated in the human body, the entire living system will efficiently utilize water molecules, which are bound within the fascia, and they become electrified. And they transmit energy signals at much faster speeds than the central nervous system. So I learned from Thomas Myers that, when you step off a step and you misjudge a step and your body goes, bang, right? You stiffen. Well, they said that that's 256 miles per hour, and the nervous system's only like 180, 186. So through this crystalline matrix, through breath, your signaling becomes faster because you're oxygenated. So the cell-to-cell communication is much faster. So you can become a better mover. Thus, your fascial network becomes a semiconductor that is conductive to electromagnetism, generating plasmic light because your blood is plasma. Your blood is almost the same exact consistency of the plasma of the ocean, right? So everything is energy, right? I'm the fish. The water for me is the atmosphere. I don't know I'm in the water, right? And I'm just generating this pressure of my breath, and my lungs are this air gas engine. So my heart isn't the pump of the body, it's just a big valve. My lungs are pumping my circulation. And we know this. I know you guys love science. In 2017, Stanford came out with a study on tranquil breathing, and they showed that there was a part of the brain in the medulla oblongata, the primal brain, and they named it the locus coeruleus. And it's spying on your breathing. Locus coeruleus. And when you're breathing hard, shallow, fast, the locus coeruleus senses internal pressure because hard, fast breathing is vasoconstriction. So it sends signals to the midbrain, and then the rest of the brain is agitated. So now my adrenal glands are pumping neurotransmitters that tell me I'm in fight or flight, but I could be sitting still and be in fight or flight because I'm breathing fast. But if I'm breathing low, slow, and deep, and I'm creating vasodilation because I'm breathing through my nose, producing nitric oxide, keeping my carbon dioxide levels high, liberating oxygen, then my locus coeruleus sends feelings to the midbrain of calmness. So, as what I tell Fred as an athlete, I want to be in the flow state all day. There's no flow state to get to. I should be in flow all day. So when I want to be sympathetically dominant, I can be sympathetically dominant and then come back. If a cheetah is chasing an antelope and the antelope gets away, the cheetah stops, it sits down, it recovers its breathing, maybe through the mouth to off-gas some of that lactic acid, then it closes its mouth and it sits and it waits until it's fully ready to run again. But not humans, right? We don't do that. We tax our nervous system. But animals never do that. There's no Tabata. The cheetah doesn't go, oh, it's Tabata. Every 20 seconds, I have to go chase the antelope again because it couldn't do it, right? It has to recover its energy, and it recovers its energy through its breathing. Now let's look at the opposite. If a wildebeest, I posted this yesterday on Instagram, I think about these things. I watch them on YouTube. So when a lot of wildebeest can get chomped by a crocodile and they get away because they're really big, strong animals. And when they get off to the other side, they're shaking because they just went through a life trauma and they shake. But they shake and they feel their feelings and they shake until they stop, and then they recover their breathing and then they move on with their life. But we don't do that. We continue to hold on to that trauma, that life and death trauma. We continue to think about it. We don't have the ability to release and recover. So what I'm teaching Fred is recovery. I want you to be in recovery mode all the time. So when you want to be sympathetically dominant, it's not taxing your nervous system. And if it's taxing your nervous system, we want it to be a good taxation. So you can recover from it and work out again the next day. I want to work out every day. Sometimes I take a day off, but I want to work out so I can consistently become better and more efficient, so I'm not putting my head through a wall like I used to do in wrestling practice, where I was pushing myself to the brink and getting hurt all the time. And that's because I was over breathing, because my coaches didn't know, and most people don't know. So we want to bring breathing into the light, especially for your audience, and really have people take a step back and say, maybe I should get my breathing right. And if I get my breathing right, maybe I'll move well, because we all want to move well. So let's focus a little bit more on our breathing. And I did it like with Go to 2, right? You had to stop working out, do the way you wanted to work out, because as Eric teaches me, I like to sprint and hold my breath. But if I'm sprinting and I'm losing my inner ankle bone high position, then what am I doing? Why am I doing an hour of exercises every day? I'm reinforcing the bad habit. So instead of sprinting, I'm jogging and I'm trying to maintain that inner ankle bone high position so I burn less energy. And when I'm holding my breath, I can run further because I'm in an anatomically or biomechanically. Now, you talked about the neuromyofascia, and I didn't talk about that. So every nerve corresponds with an artery, corresponds with lymph, and they're wrapped, they're bundled in fascia. So that's the neuromyofascial web. The nerves are in that connective tissue. And if they're compressed, the signal gets, the actin and myosin at the protein level is constantly firing. So if the actin and myosin are constantly firing, the brain compartmentalizes that part of the body that's compressed, and it learns to move around that part. Now it says, okay, that's not listening anymore. I have to, the signal's too much. So
that's like when people have, like when they say they have compensations for movement, that's the origin of it, is this compressed bundle of nerves, artery, and lymph.
Right. Because it's lost its oxygen, which means it can't remove the waste from the area, so it hardens lymphatically.
Yeah, I find that to be true. That's the way I look at it when I see patients for the most part. Sometimes it's more neurological and they just need it reconnected because it's healed and they haven't got it back. But for the most part, I'm with you on that. A lot of what you said before, I'm gonna kind of summarize it because it reigns true for me. It's really those subtle times that you don't know when you're holding your breath. Here, it's cold in Canada, right? I get out, I pump the gas, all of a sudden you're like this, and then you just keep going, right? So the rest of the day, your traps are up a little bit. You're in that sympathetic response. I think that's what happens to most people is those times that they just get triggered a little bit, and then maybe emotionally a lot, right? Something they might not even notice, right? That happens quite a bit. How do you cue on that end, or how do you handle that? Because I'm sure you've run into that, right? Like on the mental side and less the breathing side.
Well, on the mental side, I would go right to breathing, and I would teach them to soften their breath so they can soften their mind, because your body is your subconscious mind. So if your mind is overactive, your breath is overactive. So you can calm down the body by calming down the mind through the breath. So it's a feedback loop. So it's like a triangle. Breath is at the top, emotions are this triangle, and sleep is this triangle. So if my breath is off, If I'm breathing too fast, too many breaths per minute, I'm in fight or flight, even if I'm just sitting still and working. So my emotions are going to be chaotic. If my emotions are chaotic, chances are I'm not going to be able to sleep very well. And if I wake up and I didn't get a good night's sleep, then I'm already feeling like I gotta, find energy somewhere in coffee or cigarettes or alcohol, and then my breathing is going to be chaotic. So it's this nasty feedback loop. So the thing to get right first is breathing. So if somebody's having mental issues, I give them specific breathing techniques to calm their mind down. And when you calm your mind down, you start to move better because you're more relaxed. Not relaxed like I'm sleepy, but relaxed that my tissue is, again, feeling this oscillation now instead of the bracing. We do that because when you breathe through your nose, you produce nitric oxide. And in 1998, they were awarded the Nobel Prize for nasal nitric oxide. And it's a vasodilator. It actually is produced by all endothelial tissues in your body. And I heard you guys talk about this once before, the flow in your body. So you have two systems in your body: blood, which is only 20% of the fluid in your body, and lymph, which is 80% of the fluid in your body. 74% of your circulation are microcirculation. So that means one strand of hair holds 10 capillaries. So now I have my circulation all made with endothelial tissue. All my capillaries, veins, and arteries. My lymph is also made with endothelial tissue. Now that's the flow of my body. Well, every endothelial cell produces nitric oxide. And nitric oxide acts like EDRF, endothelial relaxing factor. So if I'm breathing through my nose, low, slow, and deep, then nitric oxide tells the endothelial tissue to relax. So now I can feel the vibration and the tension. I don't compartmentalize it. And nitric oxide also signals fascial tissue to release its inhibition. So nitric oxide tells the fascial tissue to let go of the tension and compression. And then my bones can float in this sea of tension and compression, and then they can start to be more aligned with the neuromyofascial exercises that I'm doing, with the softening and deepening of my breath. So I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, but
No, this is all super fascinating. I'm blown away. It's amazing. Sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you ever find that people have pre-existing tightness or constrictions around the diaphragm, or even muscularly, that inhibit breath, that require maybe an exogenous intervention like stretching, like myofascial release in other forms? Because one of the things that I find really inhibiting in my own breathing when I'm running, like I said, I got into more distance running, and I do that figure eight. But one thing that I've noticed, that even as I do a lot of myofascial release and a lot of proper posturing, I'm backchain dominant, I'm doing all the things right. When I laterally bend, I have a pump action that pushes air out of my lungs. And I find it really interesting because I haven't been able to figure out why necessarily. And this lateral bend, or this oscillation from my shoulders, literally creates a pump of air out. And I can't just do a nice, slow, controlled breath. There's always some form of pressure that's pushing out. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe do I laterally bend and start breathing into that space to create space? Do I do a lot of stretching of the ribs and try to create more space in there? Would you focus on an exogenous solution, or would you focus just on breathing as an intervention for that?
I would be doing everything together. So the exogenous answers can guide you and help you, but the slowness of the breath. So we do a technique that's called breathing light, and it's an air hunger technique. So we slow down the breath. So let's do it together, the two of you. Sit up nice and tall, close your eyes. And all I want you to do is observe your breathing. Don't think about how you're breathing. Take your cognitive mind out of this. Don't think about diaphragmatically breathing. Just observe the air as it moves in and out of your nose. Follow the air as it moves in your nose. Follow the air as it moves out of your nose. Feel the slightly colder air enter your nose. Feel the slightly warmer air leave your nose. At this point, don't consciously interfere with breathing muscles. Just simply become aware of your breathing. When you're able to follow your breathing, take a slow breath in through the nose and allow a slow, relaxed exhale. Slow down the speed of air as it enters and leaves your nose. I'm going to say that again. Slow down the speed of air as it enters and leaves your nose. Your breathing should be so light, so quiet, so still that you don't even know you're breathing. Your breathing should be so light that there's hardly any turbulence inside of your nose. Your breathing should be so soft that the fine nose hairs within your nostrils don't even move. Once again, take a slow breath in and allow a gentle, relaxed exhale. The goal of the exercise is to feel a want or hunger for air. If you feel that, then it signifies that you're doing the exercise correctly because carbon dioxide is increasing in your lungs and it's liberating oxygen to be disassociated from hemoglobin. So as you slow down the speed of air, you come to this point where you feel maybe a little bit asphyxiated, but not to a stressed point. You're finding the Goldilocks zone of what's the minimal amount of air I can breathe but feel good doing it. So the slower you breathe, the more nitric oxide you produce. And that's the answer to your question, Anthony, is that when I produce exogenous or endogenous amounts of nitric oxide, then it signals the endothelial tissue to relax, the veins to dilate, and the fascial tissue to release its inhibition. So once again, a small breath in and a small breath out to the point where you're barely breathing. It should feel soft, gentle, and ease of breath. There's no tension around your diaphragm. You find that you're not breathing, you're breathing without breathing. So everything is soft and relaxed. And as you practice this, you'll start to innervate your diaphragm because the nitric oxide is going to release the tension that surrounds the muscles that surround the diaphragm because you're fascially inhibited, not muscularly. It's always fascially first. Where there's fascial inhibition, there's going to be muscles that aren't doing their job. So as you soften the breath, you begin to notice the areas of your body that actually feel tense. And what you do is you direct that soft, slow breath into those tense areas and you send the intention of letting go. And as you let go, you notice that your breath becomes slower and you've enabled yourself to breathe more diaphragmatically. So if you're feeling those issues of laterally breathing, should I expand into it? The expansion comes from breathing lighter. Because if you breathe harder, you don't produce the nitric oxide. So when Eric was working with me on decompression, I started to teach him this. And I'm like, you'll get more decompression if you breathe lighter, slower, and deeper. And then all of a sudden you feel the decompression because the nitric oxide is relieving the tissues that are compressed. Okay, you can open your eyes. How do you feel?
Extremely relaxed.
That's good, right? Did you
Definitely.
notice anything about your diaphragm in particular?
It relaxed as well. It was it was coming out, just like the belly you were showing. That was happening to me. What about you, Anthony?
Sorry,
Oh, we love
I was muted there. Yeah, I had that feeling of oxygen hunger that you were describing, that almost like borderline hypoxic state, and it was very interesting because the focus on the slowness of the breath in particular, and that lightness. First of all, it was very easy to become present because you're paying attention to the quality. It didn't necessarily feel like I was neurotically trying to like tense up my 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 core at all to kind of control that. It was literally just slowing it down super easily, and then having that hypoxic state, and then seeing if I could ride that Goldilocks zone that you were talking about, where it's not like a fight or flight stress thing, but it was just enough to feel like on the edge of hypoxia. That was something that was really interesting. And then to feel, it was, I'm sitting on a chair, but I'm still back, I still have my rib cage ahead of my hips, and I'm still in some of these decompressive postures as I'm sitting, and I felt things in my back all the way, my thoracic spine, which is typically has a bit of a kyphosis that I can't really get rid of. It started to relax and it started to release, and all these things that I've felt like really bound up were just starting to release. And that was a very brief little session of flow breathing.
Yeah, it was only 3 minutes. Boy, you just, the way you summarize things is really great. You really get it. But you just touched on a topic that Eric and I talk about when I was talking to him about, because when we were doing these decompression exercises and they were telling me to expand into my body, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to breathe lighter, which will give me more expansion. But when you talk about back chain dominance, so I do the same thing, right? When I'm cantilevered forward to 171 degrees, if I sit back and I breathe, my belly, my rib cage is going to flare open, and it's going to force my diaphragm to breathe forward, right? But in the right posture, which is back chain dominant, my ribs come back down, I come forward, and when I breathe, I'm forced to breathe correctly, which is to breathe low, but also into my kidneys, because this is where I stimulate my energy. So if I'm in the back chain dominant position, I'm not going to breathe this way because my ribs aren't posteriorly tilted. I'm in the right position to breathe down into my body. And that's what I learned from being in that position that he taught me of back chain dominance. And I'm like, wait, that's the perfect breathing position.
Mm.
I was like, oh my God, that's how you should be. That's how you'll learn to breathe best, to be in that back chain dominant position.
It all just kind of ties together. So do you think that breathing deep in the way that people are breathing these big expansive breaths, do you think that's causing diaphragmatic dysfunction? Like when someone, when I know that even Wim Hof breathing, they discourage you from going like as deep as you possibly can. It was like the first atmosphere is how I heard it described by him. It was like you're not quite going past that like point where you feel like your lungs are about to pop necessarily. But a lot of people, when they're doing deep breathing, it's like you're feeling your rib cage expand. I know some of the flowability coaches will get you to like get into these funny postures, breathe into them, and get like a massive amount of rib cage expansion. What do you think that's doing biomechanically when you're doing those types of breath to your diaphragm, and how does that change your breathing mechanics?
Well, number one, I don't really think they're diaphragmatically breathing. I think they're filling their lungs with air. And I've nursed a couple of flowability people who have come to me who have been struggling to, and again, I'm not putting anything down, right? Maybe the people who came to me shouldn't have started at that level, right? And that's why they were sort of injured. But and I've had about 5 people come to me who felt they just weren't breathing correctly because that posture, that upper chest expansion, is not the way you're supposed to breathe, because your lungs are shaped like a triangle, and the larger part of your lungs are down at the bottom, but the highest concentration of alveoli are at the top. And if I want to get blood to the entire lung, then I have to breathe in low, slow, and deep to produce that nitric oxide, because nitric oxide flushes the blood to the entire lobe of the lung like a fish tank. And if I get blood to all those alveoli, then I increase alveolar ventilation, and I increase ventilation perfusion by taking in less air. So they're creating shapes, but those shapes are static shapes. And I'm not a static human being. My life is not static. So every time they create that static shape, they're locking that neuromyofascia. They're creating that constant pattern. And then the myofascia is going to lock itself into that pattern, which means they're not going to breathe low because they're breathing up. And you're not supposed to breathe up. You need to breathe. No master, sage, Buddha, whatever, ever brought the breath up before they learned how to breathe low. It had to have started by breathing in deeply into your body before you brought the breath up. And to me, that's just a game of telephone. People make things up, and doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. So I would not be creating shapes if my baseline breath wasn't elevated to begin with. And we call that the BOLT score, your body oxygen level test. So before you start breathing in a lot of air into your upper chest and trying to create expansion, you should try to create expansion by being soft.
That's an amazing concept. I don't know if I've explored that one yet, and I've done a lot with my breath. I do have one selfish question here, and it's kind of the way I intuitively breathe. And I've been playing with it and saying, I'm just going to let myself breathe the way I want to breathe. And what happens is a big breath, and it is kind of soft, but on the exhale, I go, I just let it out with a big like that, right? I didn't want to do it long. Basically hum, but like very deep. Does that mean something, or is that my body trying to do something? What is happening?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful, intuitive way to breathe, because when you hum, you can exhale longer. When you exhale longer, you retain more carbon dioxide, but you don't want to exhale past your functional residual capacity. So whatever a normal exhale is, I never want to push air out, because no animal on the planet will ever breathe like that. No animal will ever breathe in more than they're supposed to and out more than they're supposed to. It's just how nature is. It's only humans that distort these breathing techniques. So when we learn to breathe low, slow, and deep, and we practice hypercapnic breath holds, which is following a passive exhalation, I hold my breath. The only time I strengthen my diaphragm is when I do a strong breath hold. Your exercise will never train breathing. In fact, it's worse. Slow breathing doesn't train breathing muscles. It's only during a breath hold, when you feel the recoil of that fascial diaphragm, that's actually strengthening all the muscles required for respiration. But, Dr. Will, when you exhale and you hum, humming is like chanting. So the hum allows you to prolong your exhale, which is good for the diaphragm to be able to exhale longer, but not all the way to empty, because I still want to go to my functional residual capacity. But the hum does three things. It produces more nasal nitric oxide. It also tells me how much static I have in my electrical system, and I just made this post 2 days ago. So the louder I can hum, the more battery life I have. I can tell how energetic people are by the sound of their hum. And I've had 14-year-old people who they have muted hums because they've either been allergic, hay fever, whatever, and they can't hum very loud. So I get them their energy back, their chi energy back, by learning to hum. And the hum vibrates the 12 cranial nerves. So I can resequence my cranial nerves by adding humming in, and that's why people chant. They didn't know that, but that's why they feel so good, because humming brings all the synapses, actually it's really much even deeper than that. So you have two neurons in between the neuron, you have a synapse. Over the synapse, you develop fatty acids, right? So the fatty acids get cleaned out by the endogenous nasal nitric oxide. So the nitric oxide, now there's a lot of research coming out that says nitric oxide can reverse autoimmune because it cleans out the fatty acids over the myelin sheaths. And then when you clean out those fatty acids, what's left? What you were born with, your hardware. You don't have to rebuild it. It's there. It just needs to be cleaned up. So the humming produces that nitric oxide that cleans out those fatty acids. And then the cranial nerves come back into a neurosequencing pattern that makes me a better mover. And Fred's been on this. Do you guys know Cell Gym? Cell Gym's pretty popular. It's CELL Gym, and they put a mask on you, and it's intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, which is what I'm teaching him. But they've all of a sudden noticed that the level they have him at, his heart rate doesn't go up anymore because I have him doing simulation of altitude training with breath holds. So he's all of a sudden, his heart rate's not even working very hard because he's used to working harder because I've got him to increase his carbon dioxide levels. So his Bolt score is now going up, 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 up to a level that when he gets to game day in September, he's going to be the baddest man on the field. He's going to be, and he's got the green light, so he calls the defense. So not only does he have to be the fastest guy on the field, he's calling the plays. And he's only got 40 seconds. So I'm teaching him how to recover after every play, to recover as fast as he can through his breath to be able to think clearly. And every athlete has to do it, but they have to do it at that moment's notice, right? And it's the athletes that can't control their anxiety that don't make it to the top. And that's most of us. We can't manage our anxiety. It's not necessarily our talent, right? Because the talent is really good until the moment becomes greatest. And then all of a sudden, where'd the talent go? Because we couldn't control our anxiety because we were breathing too fast, but nobody teaches athletes how to manage their recovery and their anxiety.
That was something I even just experienced in the moment when we did that 3 minutes of breathing, where I was working in my tech job prior to this, and I was running around. I was even a little bit late sending you the link to join the call because I was trying to manage so many different things. So my body was on high alert, and in 3 minutes of breathing, my entire emotional state changed. My capacity to articulate myself and slow myself down and not feel in a rush to say what I had to say. I'm sure even if you listen to the start of this podcast compared to the cadence of my voice now,
Yes,
there's probably a massive difference, right? I just wanted to steer the conversation a little bit into one of the questions, or a few of the questions that some of our audience had. You mentioned a Bolt score, and what does that stand for? One more time.
Body oxygen level test.
So someone asked, are there daily practices that you do for maintaining a high Bolt score?
Yes, of course. I do breathing work every day. So I wake up in the morning and I meditate for an hour, but I don't consider it meditation. I focus on very gently breathing. So when I wake up, my brain's in the theta state, which is the imagination state. It's pliable. I can do whatever I want in that state. And then by slowly breathing and focusing on my breathing, I can keep that state longer throughout the day, right? Which means I have sharper focus, more ability to concentrate. Then I do my breath work. Then I do my go-to movements every morning. And then I work out. And I do it all fasted. So I make sure I don't put any food in my body. So I'm always managing my energy by managing my digestion. So yeah, there are very specific exercises that we can do to increase our threshold to carbon dioxide to make our Bolt score go up. And really, it's the primary intervention before all medical interventions. In 2021, Washington University came out with a study that specifically said, and I don't want to say this word, but it was called, in the days of the C word, the respiratory illness, you can assess your risk stratification to incurring a respiratory illness by how long you can hold your breath. And this is what we do. So if your Bolt score is under 25 seconds, now your Bolt score is, I take a silent normal breath in and a silent normal breath out to my functional residual capacity, and I hold my breath, which means I still have air in my lungs because I'm not going to breathe all the air out. I breathe out to the FRC, and then I pinch my nose and I wait till I have the first definitive sign to breathe. It's not a breath hold, it's a pause of the breath. And as soon as I feel the slightest desire to breathe, I let go. If my Bolt score is under 25 seconds, then there's a very high chance that I might be uh, at risk for a respiratory illness. And that's because carbon dioxide levels are low. I have a low threshold of carbon dioxide. So I'm not getting enough blood to the alveoli, which means that my alveoli could fill up with fluid, edema. Then my oxygen saturation will drop. All of a sudden I feel short of breath, right? But if my Bolt score is above 25 seconds, it's the same 89% chance that I will never have chronic degenerative disease in my life because I'm managing my blood gases. Your breath regulates your blood pH, and that's all that matters is blood pH. And they don't even test that at the doctor. You go for a yearly physical and they don't test your blood pH. There's only two sides of chemistry. You got to know what your blood pH is. And food is irrelevant to blood pH. It's breathing that regulates body and tissue interstitial pH. So my breathing can regulate the pH of my tissue. And then, Dr. Will, if my pH is balanced, then I'm going to be able to remove lactic acid while I'm producing it. So if you look, I tagged you guys on that 9-year-old boy that I trained from Australia. Forget about it. That kid is going to be an Olympic champ because he's breathing the way he was born breathing. And his Bolt score was 5 when he started, and now it's a minute.
Wow.
He's going to set the world ablaze, but he's calm. He's like this wonderful, calm child now. And he's got the ability to think clearly. And at 9 years old, to manage his breathing at the start of a race. It's made him smarter, cognitively smarter, because oxygen gets to the frontal lobe last. Because the frontal lobe is the last part of the mammalian brain evolved through industrialization. Everything else was primal before that. So oxygen is going to go to all the other parts of the body before it gets to the executive center. So Anthony, when we learn to increase our Bolt score, we liberate oxygen, and the oxygen is only going to get sent to the places that need it the most. And for most of us, it's going to be that frontal lobe, that prefrontal cortex that manages our emotions, our executives, our pleasure center. I mean, it's endless, right? What we could talk about and how important breathing is.
So you did mention that diet doesn't have as much of an impact or any impact on blood pH compared to breath. But you do have a very specific dietary intervention that you use for yourself, which is fruitarianism, right? And I always find conversations about nutrition particularly emotionally charged because everyone has an idea of how you should eat and how you shouldn't, and they have opinions about the different things. I went through 2 years of veganism myself, whole food plant-based diet based on Dr. Michael Grieger's work, and I unfortunately felt quite sick on doing that, and I wanted to make veganism work for me for ethical reasons. At the time, I was very invested in yogic philosophy, trying to practice ahimsa, which is non-harming.
Nice.
And it was actually it was interesting to me because I learned that a lot of Jains practice ahimsa, and they will only eat fruit because fruit is the only plant that you can eat that falls from the tree, and then you're not interrupting plants either. So they're saying, oh, if we pick vegetables and we cut leaves and everything, well, it's still violence towards the. So certain Jains would only eat fruit. I've recently started eating more towards an animal-based diet with quite a few naturally occurring carbohydrates, and I feel great. And I wanted to get your take on what are the physiological benefits of eating a fruitarian diet? Have you experienced any issues with transitioning to that? Did your body's physiology change, energy levels, body composition? What was your experience? Because you've been doing it for quite a while now, haven't you?
Yeah, 3 years, 2 months.
Wow. So why do you choose a fruitarian lifestyle from a dietary perspective? How does it affect your body chemistry? And did you experience any issues with transitioning from that?
Well, I read Professor Arnold Ehret's mucusless diet,
Hmm.
and I believe Professor Ehret to be like the godfather of health, and he was alive in the 1800s. And he wrote some incredible books, especially one called Rational Fasting. And I regularly see an acupuncturist, and I started seeing him 4 years ago. And he told me, well, I had been to an acupuncturist before that, and I was told that my kidneys were in such bad shape that guys like me would have a heart attack in their 60s and die. That's what I was told. And I was like, what? I was like, look at me. But I was like ego driven, right? I'm like, look at me. How could you say that? I'm the picture of health. Look at my body. And then I worked with that person for a year and a half, and then I decided to leave and find someone else. And when I went to this guy, who's a former gastroenterologist and an acupuncturist and Chinese, practiced in Chinese medicine his whole life, he very nicely said, I agree with their assessment. And I was like, oh shit. So I was like, okay, now here I am. I'm like, well, I don't want to die in my 60s. I was having night sweats. The reason I was having night sweats is because I was an insomniac. So my body would be dumping bicarbonate at night because my kidneys weren't filtering. So I would have to sweat to get out the toxins because you need to sleep in order to recover. And I wasn't sleeping because my body was burning up from the inside out. I'm just going to say this, from 42 years of being a carnivore. So I haven't eaten flesh now in 10 years. And I've been vegan for 7, but I don't actually believe in veganism. I don't believe that you should eat plants because plants have cellulose, and your body doesn't make the enzyme cellulase to digest plants because plants weren't designed to be eaten. They have chemicals inside them called lectins that are not good for you. They're toxic. But again, you can't tell a carnivore that the organ-rich meat isn't good for them because they're like, well, this is a piece of liver and it's nutrient dense, so that means it's good for me. Well, how do you digest it? Right? What's your bowel transit time when you eat that liver? Is it calorically dense? Yes, but it's calorically dense for an animal that has the teeth to eat it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there any human being on the planet that can tackle an animal right now and bite into it and kill it and eat it? No. We had to develop tools to do that. So that means it's not natural, but I'm not going to go any further than that. And then when it comes to plants, the fruit is the reproductive sex organ of the plant. The fruit has seeds. So when you eat the seeds, you digest them or you don't digest them, and then the hominid would poop them out in the forest, and then the tree would actually be able to proliferate itself. And fruit is structured water. It's light. It's biophotons. And fruit actually goes in alkaline if you do monofruit eating. So when you eat it, it doesn't create an extra acidity in the body. So my kidneys were dysfunctional. So I told him about a year into seeing him, I said, I'm going to become a fruitarian. And he said, I don't think you should do this. And I said, why not? And he said, because you need protein. And I said, Dr. Ming, I actually don't eat protein. What I take is marine phytoplankton. So I've been on this for 6 years. So I can't give you an honest experience of being a fruitarian because I've always been on this. And these phytoplankton is the first living organism on the planet created by light, sound, and vibration. So it created itself in the ocean, and then it learned to excrete waste, and then it brought the waste back in morphogenically, and then it learned to feed off of its own waste. So it's got all these essential amino acids. So I'm always making the perfect proteins in my body. That's why I don't need protein, because I have the monomers that make up the protein chain are essential amino acids. So what you need is essential amino acids, not proteins. If I take in extra protein, then my body has to secrete insulin and burn more energy to break it down. So it's got all the essential fats. So I don't need any animal fats because it's in here. And it's got all the vitamins and all the minerals. And it's the same plasma as my blood. So I'm cleaning myself and nourishing myself at the same time, specifically my hypothalamus gland, which is the conductor of God's symphony. So when my hypothalamus gland gets the perfect information, because food is a signal, that's all it is. It's not nutrition like we're taught, because we are breatharians. Whenever we started here, we were breathing air. So ideally, our digestive organs are redundant. We developed them once we started eating the fruits. Now, a fruit is very easily digestible. It requires no insulin. So it diffuses through the cell wall. It allows nutrition to get in, which is sugar, and nutrition to get out. And if you think about mother's milk, the first 1 to 3 days, mother's milk is colostrum. It's not milk. And that's where the HGH is and the protein. But after 1 to 3 days, your mom's giving you milk for the next year, year and a half. And what is it made of? Sugar. So you're reared on sugar, but yet we think you need protein, but you need sugar. So my brain, my body runs on sugar. So I eat fruits all day long, and I eat less, and I have sustainable energy, and I'm able to work out as hard as I want. And my kidneys have reversed their damage. So a month into it, he said, wow, this diet's working for you. You should stay on it. 8 months into it, he said, Bryan, I know I told you not to do this diet. He said, but what you've done with your body is nothing short of remarkable, and I've never seen anything like it. You should stay on this diet because it's working with you. He goes, not only have you reversed all your kidney damage, but you're now strengthening your primordial chi energy. And he said, at your age, it's nearly impossible. So I'm getting younger. I call it youthing. And I'm going to continue to get younger and younger as I travel around the sun, because I'm not putting obstructions in my body. So my body's taking in some nutrition, if you want to call it that, and then it's being able to get rid of the waste, because now my kidneys are filtering. And this is my urine. And if you see my urine, it's milky white. Well, the milky white is the filtration from my kidneys. And let's not talk about the fact that I'm going to drink this, but the milkiness means that my kidneys are filtering, right? So that's a very good sign. And when I started, my urine was crystal clear. And now it always looks like this. It has sediment in it, which means my body's getting rid of the metabolites, right? And at some point throughout the day, I drink one of these because I put the growth hormone back in my body. And I'm also charging it in the sun with crystals.
That's very interesting.
It's incredibly interesting. So it sounds like, the marine phytoplankton thing, that you're still getting all your essential amino acids, you're still getting all of the essential fats, but with as little other stuff as possible.
That's right.
It sounds
no
like
vitamins. Yep.
And I love the point that you made about colostrum converting more into sugars, right? And because that was something that I experienced. I tried a host of low carb interventions at various points in my life for fat loss and for different things. I've used it medicinally, mostly fasting, combined with low carbohydrate interventions to heal yeast overproductions in my gut and stuff. But the one thing that I found was there was no such thing as a sustainable low carbohydrate diet for me. I sort of had this realization that, yes, I had the colostrum to sort of higher sugar content breast milk realization, but I also realized that everything that your body does, even in a ketogenic state, is trying to achieve this state where you have a steady amount of glucose. Like the whole point of ketone production is to produce glucose endogenously. And even you see people in the carnivore community like Paul Saladino who stopped eating just meat and started adding in fruit and honey because he started to feel better. It's like our bodies want glucose. It wants to utilize carbohydrate. It's one of the building blocks it's the most efficient form of energy for human beings. So
That's
it
right.
makes sense that, you know, I you're the first other person that I've ever heard talk about biophotons in food. And this is something that I heard of, I'm going to say 11 years ago. I had a friend who was a nutrition coach. I was a personal trainer at the time, and he was a nutrition coach. And we'd have these long discussions like, have you ever heard about biophotons? And I had no idea what the hell it was. Couldn't find anything online. For those who are listening, could you describe what biophotons are and why they're beneficial to health?
Yeah, it's very simple. That beautiful ball of light that's coming through my window is giving me biophotons right now. And the frequency of the sun is called Roy G. Biv. And those 7 frequencies correspond to the 7 major organs in your body. So in the 1940s, when Raymond Rife made that Rife machine that was curing cancers, there was a doctor in France who was taking people outside and reflecting the sun onto the organs that were going bad. And within like hours, the sun was healing people's organs, just reflecting the sun into their organs. And those are the biophotons, because I'm an electric energy being, and my fascia is that crystalline matrix that needs oxygen. So when I ingest structured water that's been, everything has been created by the sun, animals too. But this is as least broken down as possible. It's in its original state. It's less dense. So the biophotons are the energy. They're called angstroms. So if you don't cook your food, then the angstroms of the food are very high, and that's how you increase your resonant frequency. And Anthony, I think it's pretty much why the group you were talking about, I forgot what the name of it was, where they said even plants have consciousness and they don't want to do any harm. I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't judge. My wife isn't even vegan. I live with somebody who I eat fruit and she eats what she wants. So I even have been able to make this lifestyle work for the two of us, where if we go out to eat, I eat salad. Right? So that's the time when I'll eat leafy greens. So that's the only vegetables I'll eat is salad. And because they also have biophotons and nitrates, and they have a high nitrate concentration, which keeps my nitric oxide levels high. So I'm always looking to not bring in dead energy. I will never eat flesh again in my life, never. And you guys know, I mean, I'm pretty freaking muscular, right? And I'm strong.
Really?
I'm really strong, and I can still wrestle with the best of them. So I feel better than ever before because I've rebuilt my kidney chi energy.
Well, that's incredibly cool. I unfortunately have to wrap up the call because I have to get back to work. I feel like we could keep talking for several hours, so we'll have to get you on for a follow-up episode. This was an incredible introduction to your work and some of your philosophies beyond just breathing. And thank you so much for joining us today on The Art of Move, for sharing a practice with us, for expanding our minds and really just kind of opening a window to another way of thinking about how important breath is to movement, and even thinking about the biochemistry of the body in a little bit of a more nuanced way. This was really, really insightful. If people want to learn more about your work, where are the best places that they can find you?
On Instagram, it's called Tensegral, Tensegral Breathing, Tensegral Breathing, or my website, quantumfitness.org. And I have a beginner breathing program that I offer for people that's really beautiful, life transforming. It's also very affordable because breathing really should be free. There's a lot of breathing programs out there that cost thousands of dollars, and mine is a night out. So I want to make it affordable for everybody. And I have a community, a private community. Once you join the group, you get added to a private community so people can be connected and ask questions forever. I do live weekly Zoom calls for my community. So there's constant interaction, but the program is automated. It's one video every day, learning how to breathe, and it'll teach you everything you need to know about breathing. And then, of course, I do one-on-one sessions and all that kind of stuff and monthly coaching. But the breathing program itself is really the best way to start. And you can just email me or Instagram me. I wake up to beautiful messages every day. You'd be surprised at the messages I get from all over the world where people just send me love. They just send me beautiful messages, and mostly from guys. And it used to be I was the kind of guy people looked up to because I was always so jacked. And now I'm still that guy, but it's more of a spiritual way. And now I know I'm following my path. I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be because I'm here to share and help others. And thank you guys for this opportunity. I hope I was able to add to the conversation and I didn't go off on too many tangents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was a while. I'm going to be listening back to this one more than once, and I'll definitely be grabbing your starting course and probably hit you up for some private stuff as well. So thank you again for joining us. You can follow me at The Body Moves on Instagram. Will is at The Art of Move, and Bryan is at Tensegral Breathing. Thank you guys for listening to The Art of Move. This is episode 52. If you like us on iTunes and Spotify, leave us a rating, and you can check out our next upcoming live shows on nofilter.net, as well as the video replay. We'll catch you next time, guys. Thank you.
Have a good one, guys.